Morning. This is my subject for today. Mad Ouija. This is the latest published book by Linda King, my sister. She gave it to me yesterday. And I started reading it. I'd read it before when she first wrote it years ago, not too long after the breakdown, but before she met Charles Bukowski, who is the subject of her first published book, Loving and Hating Charles Bukowski. And she had written the story of her nervous breakdown, and so this contradicts the idea that she copied him and became a writer through he was her muse. Well, that might have been so to a certain degree, but Linda, she wrote this nervous breakdown story before she ever met Bukowski. And I was pretty afraid that Bukowski, with his drinking habits, would trigger off some more upset, because her husband that she divorced did not drink at all. He was not an alcoholic or didn't have a problem with alcohol. And our father was an alcoholic, and she'd come from a culture where there was really quite a lot of drinking, and on that side of the family. But anyway, Bukowski was smart enough that he didn't really do her a whole lot of harm. I don't know how much good he did her. It's hard to say, but this book is all Linda. I mean, she doesn't have to thank a famous person for being the other one in her other book. No, this is Linda. And I can't get over just how completely honest she is in this account. And it's sometimes embarrassing when you're irrational and you say or do things that other people regard as stark raving mad. It's hard to write that and admit that maybe your behavior wasn't really. But she's fearless. She goes ahead, and eventually you see her point. She makes her point. She makes you see how a person could get all upset over what she got upset over. And that's very often what happens with a nervous breakdown. A person gets into some kind of crisis and they can't come out of it. They just keep accelerating and accelerating until their mind is no longer functioning. They've gone without sleep for days. They are, they're in a state. And this is sort of what begins to happen to get her so off kilter that by the time she got to Page, where I lived, me and another sister, she picked up two sisters, and they come bringing her to see if we couldn't do something for her when we, and I was just totally shocked to death when I witnessed her after I don't know how many days of not sleeping, and I decided that I wasn't going to be able to help her before I thought she needed to be seen by a psychiatrist, that her state should be recognized. And I did think about shock therapy. I hadn't kept up with what they were doing to the mentally ill anymore after my escape. And so I didn't really know what was going to happen to her when she went to the psychiatrist, who did commit her after he talked to her, and unfortunately prescribed shock treatment. Which, as soon as I heard it, I told my dad, who signed for her? Who signed for her? Because I had entertained the idea that my dad and mother would need to sign for her, and I could tell them, don't let them give her shock treatment. That's what I was hoping for. I hadn't given it a whole lot of thought, but instead, they contacted her husband and told him that she'd probably never recover without shock treatment, which that's what relatives were told. I mean, that they believed in the shock treatment. And so, oh boy, this book is like, ooh, because when she's prescribed shock treatment, that's when she really gets bad. And I understand just what, because my own memoir is the story of how I got out of shock treatment, which nearly killed me, as I slowed my breathing down so that I was having, like they called, a catatonic seizure. In other words, I was semi-conscious, and I did this to myself to persuade them they could not give me electric shock, or it would kill me. So I was doing my strategy. I was figuring out how I could get out of it, because I was convinced, absolutely convinced, with chronic fatigue, the chances of me living through shock treatment were not good, because I'd already had some near-death experiences. So there's our two sisters with, and both of our books are going to be up on Amazon very shortly. They're going to be telling the individual stories of our clashes with the psychiatrist over electric shock therapy. And this book, just look at it. So this should be of interest to have two sisters take on the treatment at the time. I was 20 and she was around 20 when we had it, or when we were prescribed electric shock therapy.